Taking on Water. My name is Daniel Vallis from InformedChristians.com, a website ministry devoted to discerning current events from a Christian perspective. We are commanded to be sober, to be vigilant, and to be ready. Thank you for all those who send in news, tips, articles, your thoughts and feedback. It is a great help, and I am so encouraged that there are brothers and sisters out there who are watchful and desire an understanding of the times and have a desire to live for Christ in light of what we see. This is a warning, but it is not a prediction. We have heard the calls for peace and safety. We know sudden destruction is coming, but we do not know the future. Recently, we looked at some of the calendar overlaps and how a lot of the enemy action seems to be pointing exactly to this time that we find ourselves at right now in this January window, right after the New Year's Eve D-Day, when they seem to be really pushing and using up the UN Year of Light to really get everything in final place. And really, from the very next day, January 1st, we've seen things really pick up and accelerate. And we've seen just with the difference between the two, Economist covers how that has also been a clue and a hint, apparently, that coincides with a lot of what we're seeing, how they seem to also be pointing toward this narrowing window. And because of that, a lot of the 2015 events are still in play. And we talked before about a lot of the significance of the 50th there on the drum set. And this year, especially later on in the year, we've been seeing a lot of 50th anniversaries. And they seem to be pointing to that this is something very significant going on at this time. And what is the next big 50th coming up? The 50th Super Bowl. And this is very important. And notice the date, February 7th. February 7th. But a big play on the gold and silver. And this one is in San Francisco Bay Area. Here's the emblem for the host committee. But we had talked before about the gold and silver gates. And they're using so much tie together now with this Super Bowl and the Golden Gate, using it in promotions with it. Very suspicious that they picked the 50th Super Bowl to take place here. Again, it's mainly symbolic of what is represented. But then Google, on their latest doodle, they had the monarch butterflies, and they were trying to talk about how it's related to the mountains of butterflies, things. But monarch butterflies have been long used, especially in mainstream media, to symbolize transformation, radical transformation. It's usually used in connection with mind control, but it symbolizes basically complete transformation of going from the caterpillar to the butterfly. Are they expecting major transformation at this time of year? From everything that we've seen pushing toward this time and getting ready for this time, it looks like, yes, they are expecting major transformation in the world very soon. So if this 50th Super Bowl is happening on the 7th, when is that? Well, that's the day right before the Chinese lunar calendar switches over to the next year. Very suspicious. Again, I do not think this is coincidence. Let's go back to what happened at the last Super Bowl building up to this time marker. Well, the last one took place at the Phoenix Stadium in Phoenix. And this was the one that had Katy Perry as Prometheus, as Lucifer, coming in and riding the beast with the particles, opening a doorway and pathway. This is where she sang her Dark Horse song. That goes with a lot of the symbolism we've seen lately. And also with the falling away. Both of those were in the parable that she was acting out. Do they expect those events to take place between then and the next Super Bowl? It strongly looks like it's pointing toward that, but we can't say for sure. But the way the events are going, it looks like that's probably what they're expecting. Just prior to the last Super Bowl, Katy Perry released a commercial with Pepsi. A commercial where she talked about and showed off her time machine. And notice the prominent 666 there in the background too, and everything else that we pointed out before. But she showed off her time machine and talked about how she was going to be bringing in a special guest, which they really never played on in the halftime show. So it always got me wondering, why did they plug this into the commercial and give it so much emphasis? And of course, it was also referencing Back to the Future, which occurred with its anniversary back in October. But why did they have this message just prior to the last Super Bowl? But when I first saw it, the first thing that went through my mind is Elvis Presley, because my knowledge of rock and roll is not that very broad. But then it turns out just the other day was Elvis Presley's birthday. So that got me thinking, that's happening in the same time frame that we're seeing all this other stuff come together. Let's revisit the commercial and see if there's really something to Elvis Presley being connected to that commercial in time. When we look at the commercial, and they were showing off the time machine, they were pointing toward around the time that her Pepsi commercial came out in 2014, just prior to the Super Bowl in 2015, February. But when you just catch it just right, you find that the countdown, the countdown in red at the top there, as she keeps talking, it's always counting up. So by the time they get to the guy zapping in, it's close to present day. But just when it starts out, it's starting out in the 60s, which I thought was very interesting. And then it's always counting up. And then they bring in this guy. It looks like it's just some sort of mannequin rocker. But it is interesting to have a guy walking by at this exact same time with a more classical guitar instead of something we might think of as more modern. And I think that's a very important clue to establish exactly what the pattern is that they're showing. They're showing a famous musician from the 60s who would be more classic rock and roll. And so I just did a little bit of searching and found out later on, of course, Elvis Presley, he definitely wore the leather outfits that kind of resemble what was in the commercial. But then as I started looking more closely toward the 60s and 70s, he had some really interesting jumpsuits. And one motif that he had on a lot was a phoenix. And they even specifically say it's a phoenix several times. This one was interesting because they even put on the back of it large United States seals, and we talked about that from the quarter, it looks like. But we talked all about the symbolism of that. That's definitely a phoenix, talking about America is the phoenix. And he always had his little cape spread out doing the wingspan thing. He was showing off a phoenix. And the more you look, he even specifically had jumpsuits with phoenixes on them. And you can go to Graceland and they'll tell you that's what they're called. They are definitely named the Phoenix outfits. He even had 4 of them, 4 different colors of the Phoenix. Very suspicious. And of course, he's wearing an Egyptian Ankh necklace over there too. Very suspicious that they're pulling up and referencing deep symbology from back then. Then I found this really interesting one. They call it the sundial, but it's obviously not a sundial. It's a Latin American calendar. We've been looking at that lately too with our Revelation Spiral of Time. Very suspicious. And then he had this one jumpsuit called Fire. And as I got to looking at it, I was thinking, you know what? That color pattern looks very familiar. Oh yeah, that's almost exactly what Katy Perry wore at her halftime show. Fire. In those same colors. Very suspicious. February 7th. Do they expect the parables that they told in the last halftime show to come to pass before this next one? I don't know. But they've been dropping a lot of hints about time and the Phoenix, and also alien contact tied to that. They expect something to happen, and it looks like things have definitely ramped up. We've seen the stock market and the economy really start to go crazy on a roller coaster since January 1st, and it's not going to get better. It's not going to get better. We are taking on water, so to speak. Things are not going to get better, and the Bible even tells us that. The perilous times are going to increase, just like a woman giving birth. It's going to increase, increase, increase. We've all heard the story of the Titanic, the ocean liner that sank on its maiden voyage. And there are so many lessons and parallels to what we see going on right now. Prophetically, we know we've already hit the iceberg. We've heard the calls for peace and safety. That means sudden destruction is coming. That means we are sinking presently. We are already taking on water, so to speak. We are losing time. The sinking part is inevitable. We are already, right now, while you're listening to this, in a sense, prophetically taking on water. And we always need to keep that in mind. People have an expectation that, well, we heard the warnings, well, I can just do whatever I want, and then one day, whatever will happen, will happen. No, right now we are taking on water. That means we need to change what we are doing right now and live accordingly with in mind that we are sinking. We've heard the warnings go out. Just like on the Titanic, they sent off distress flares. And it still took a while for it to really sink into people's brains that, yes, they were sinking. even on the ship, and that's why so many delayed getting into the lifeboats. They had a problem with the lifeboats, but a lot more would have been saved if people had lived in light of the warnings that they were given and had prepared themselves accordingly. And that is why we make these videos. It's so that we can see the warnings, we've heard them, and so we can constantly be reminded, what do I need to do to prepare myself? Where do I need to be in my heart and life? What do I need to be doing right now today, living in light of the fact that we're already taking on water? And at the same time, we can encourage our brothers and sisters to also be ready, help them get ready for the evacuation process as well. Now, Jesus told his disciples, point blank, he said, the days when I'm coming are going to be like this. They're going to be eating and drinking, partying, buying and selling, marrying, planting, building. They're going to be going on as though life goes on, and people will be oblivious to the fact that they're taking on water in the world and that sudden destruction is looming so close. And that's what we're seeing now today, even in the churches, even among Christian brothers and sisters. Just going on, playing shuffleboard on the deck, so to speak, not concerned. Seeing the warning flares does not concern them. They're more preoccupied with idiotic stuff, such as rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, involved in activities that are totally pointless at this stage. And we need to examine our own life and say, am I doing this same thing too? Am I playing shuffleboard? Am I rearranging the deck chairs? Am I involved in stuff that is not at all important right now and is actually keeping me from where I need to be and what I need to be doing right now? What are we supposed to be doing right now? Well, Christian, you and I are called soldiers, we're called servants, and we're called stewards. That means we have a responsibility to our captain to help in the evacuation process. And that's one reason we've put together the resource as a flare, a distress signal to alert people that the ship is sinking. Live accordingly. We are running out of time. We are already taking on water. We must change our schedule, what we are doing, and get ready. That is our primary responsibility right now. We are the stewards. We are to assist others in the evacuation. We are to help them get ready. We are to encourage them and exhort them and help others be ready for Christ when he comes. Hebrews 10:24-25. And let us consider one another to provoke and to love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Servant, steward, that is your responsibility. That is my responsibility, to direct people and get them ready. The distress flares have already gone off. We are already taking on water. What matters now is not rearranging the deck chairs or playing shuffleboard. What matters right now is making sure we are where we are supposed to be, and we are doing what will count for eternity, what will matter, and that we are wise and not foolish. Steward, may Christ find you serving him first and highest above all else. Maranatha.